No, he is therefore one with every other. Please assume some minutes of silence. I welcome you all once again. Today, we have gathered here to celebrate the teachings of the greatest ascetic, the man who forwarded the idea of renunciation, the saint who strived for peace and harmony, the God who taught the world to be its own light. Today, we celebrate Buddha Purnima. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Sister SVITLANA GAVRYLENKO, the General Secretary of the Theosophical Society of Ukraine. Sister SVITLANA has been the member of the Theosophical Society since 1998. She retired from the post of Assistant Professor of Mathematics, Probability Theory from the National Agrarian University. A stalwart herself, she has successfully spearheaded the Committee of Annual International Forum on Spiritual Development of Man and Society and the Committee for Ethics and Humanitarian Expertising. I welcome Sister SVITLANA to enlighten us on the topic, Buddha and his teachings for the humanity. Sister SVITLANA.
Thank you, dear Shriyashi, for presentation. Dear friends, I am very grateful to Mr. Pradeep Mahapatra for inviting me to participate in the celebration of Buddha Purnima, and I'm happy to be with you today. This day marks a number of important events related to the incarnation among people of one of the great teachers of mankind. Vesak, the full moon day in May, is the holiest day for millions of Buddhists around the world. It was on Vesak day 2.5 millennia ago, in 623 BC, that Buddha was born. Also, on the same full moon day in May, the Buddha attained enlightenment. And on the same full moon day in May, the Buddha left this world at the age of 80. The international recognition of Vesak Day by the United Nations General Assembly is resolution number 54/115 of February 8, 2000 year. This resolution means recognition of the contribution that the Buddha's teachings have made and continue to make today to the spiritual development of mankind. Undoubtedly, you probably know much more about the life of the Buddha and about his teachings that I do, because I was born in a different mental environment. Nevertheless, the following definition of Buddha's teachings is close to me. Please, may I share my presentation? Is it possible for me to share the presentation?
Yes, I've already made you co-host, you can present.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have you seen?
Yes, yes.
Mhm. And now?
Yes.
Mhm. So, so this is the definition that I want to share with you. Buddhism is one of the most widespread religion and philosophical teachings, the goal of which is the path to enlightenment, self-improvement, harmony, moral and spiritual purification. Every theosophist is interested in Buddhism, if only for the reason that theosophical doctrine is extremely close to the truer teaching of Gautama Buddha. We know from theosophical teaching that the arrival of the great teacher in the world of people is an important event which is determined by the evolutionary needs of humanity and is carefully planned by the planetary hierarchy in time and space. Undoubtedly, we cannot know all the details of such a preparatory process, but some information is revealed to humanity by the masters themselves through their proxies, and some conclusions are already drawn by directly interested researchers. The planetary cycles are very clearly organized and set forth in the secret doctrine. As we know, the control and organization of the mind is the main task of the fifth human race. And as always, there is an interweaving of positive and negative aspects, both great opportunities and certain obstacles and dangers. Regulating natural processes and helping to put them in the evolutionary direction, that is in the right direction of development according to the great divine plan, is precisely what the great teachers help. What might be the danger and challenges of the cycles of the fifth race? First of all, there are peculiarities of the mental sphere of the person. After all, subordinated to its personality and isolated from the higher principles, the mind becomes destructive and dangerous. Intellectual development without love and compassion threatens the planet and humanity. Now, more than ever before, we see it and have begun to realize it. Near 2,500 years ago, at the dawn of the fifth human race, Gautama Buddha was chosen and self-proclaimed to carry out a certain mission to help people adjust to the correct use of their mental adjustment. That is why Buddha's teaching, first of all, are aimed at the formation of high ethical and moral values. Buddha is known to the world as the teacher of compassion. And only then, on the basis of compassion and mercy, the skills of mastering a personal mental sphere are formed. From the beginning of the origin to the present time, Buddhism has come a long way in more than 2,500 years. So, I want to focus on how we see Buddhism today in the world. Today it is customary to consider it in its three aspects, three quizzes. First, as a philosophical teaching. Second, as a religion. And third, as a way of life. And all three have a right to exist and have their numerous supporters, although this division is quite conditional and can be successfully combined into one. Now, let us consider these components separately. First, as a philosophical teaching, it has its canonical texts. It forms a certain picture of the world. It has a number of research centers, methods of interpretations of various provisions and concepts, a whole galaxy of authoritative authors, continuers and interpreters of the main texts. It is in this direction that a great contribution belongs to the present founder of the Theosophical Society, Henry Steele Olcott, who, for 30 years of selfless service, collected and in 1881 published the main ancient sacred texts that he found in various secret and hidden places in India and Sri Lanka, creating the Buddhist Catechism. This is still considered the canonical collection of Buddhist texts. As a philosophical teaching, Buddhism is very close to theosophy. In the Western world, people who first came to public lectures and presentations on theosophy superficially even equated theosophy with Buddhism. The main doctrines of Buddhism, karma and reincarnation, made it possible to create a coherent and consistent system of laws and rules of life, which is logically embedded in the head and forms the basis of practical application of the entire system of this knowledge. And second, Buddhism as a religion is also popular in the world. A characteristic feature of Buddhism as a religion is the absence of the symbol of faith, because the Buddha himself always advised his students not to trust anyone and anything without thinking, to check anything with their own experience and common sense. Another distinguishing feature of Buddhism is the absence of the concept of a creator God. It is interesting that for almost 2.5 millennia, Buddhism as a religion was rather closed. It never showed tendencies of expansion, did not seek to spread in the world, and did not make efforts to convert new adherents to its ranks. But recently, the situation has changed, and Buddhism has become one of the world religions. We can name two main factors thanks to which Buddhism is in today's world is the second religion after Christianity in terms of the number of believers. The first factor includes the capture of Tibet by Chinese and the first immigration of High Lamas in the 20th century to various countries of the Western world, mainly to America. There, they began to look for shelter, to create communities, which later turned into spiritual centers of Buddhism. The second factor can be considered the special practicality of Buddhism, its inherent clear system of rules and advices which must be followed in everyday life with a clear understanding to their meaning and necessity. For the pragmatic people of the West, this is a very important argument to pay attention and heed this advice. Practically, there are currently no country in the Western world where there are no Buddhist communities, religious centers, or Buddhist monasteries. That is why the religion of Buddhism spread throughout the world in the 20th century, and today it already competes with Christianity and has good trends in the 21st century. Third point, Buddhism as a way of life is the third component. This component is also related to the attractive and understandable practicality of this teaching, as well as to the pronounced psychology of Buddhism, which is based on the deep understanding of human nature and its multidimensionality. Today, psychology as a science about the inner self of a man is very relevant because the time has come for the person to know himself. Therefore, the psychological side of Buddhism promotes interest and deepening into this teaching for those whose time has come. Why? One may not be associated with any Buddhist religion organization, but simply organize one's own relationship with the Buddha's teaching and fulfill certain voluntary assumed duties in order to maintain an inner state of harmony and balance, good relations with the world and surrounding people, working capacity, physical and psychological health. It certainly requires a lot of personal efforts, but it has huge positive that far outweigh the difficulties of following certain rules. So we can conclude that the teachings of Buddha, after a long time of its limited existence in the space of the East, began to spread around the world and attract the attention of the people of the Western world. Our observations over the past 30 years have shown that both in Ukraine and the entire European part of the post-Soviet space, we are witnessing the spread of interest in Buddhism in all three forms of its manifestation. Moreover, it is interesting to know that in our opinion, there are several main motivations according to which people become interested in Buddhism. Such motivations are: first, interest to Oriental exoticism, the desire to raise personal significance by belonging to something sacred, esoteric, tantric. As a rule, most people with similar motivations lose their interest in Buddhism when faced with its demands for serious and regular personal practice. Second, attitude to the practice of Buddhism as a part of psychological training in various types of Eastern martial arts. Although this is not quite right in terms of prioritization, most of people who come to Buddhism based on this motivation engage in Buddhist practice quite deeply and seriously. Eastern martial arts groups are the main centers through which Buddhism most often penetrates the youth environment. And third, interest in Buddhist psychotechnics as methods of changing one's psychological qualities, solving personal psychological problems, working with one's character. This motivation was and remains one of the main ones in the countries of Western Europe and in the USA. In Ukraine, there is also a tendency to increase the number of people who consciously come to Buddhism precisely with this motivation. Recently, we have seen a significant increase in interest in Buddhist precisely as a system that gives practical fruits just in this life, here and now, and not in the afterlife or in the next incarnation. The fact that this is precisely a practical interest in the philosophical and psychotechnical aspects of Buddhism, and not the usual desire of people for exotics, is the mass of originally Buddhists. There are practically no representatives of those national minorities living in Ukraine for whom the practice of Buddhism in its ritual work is traditional. I mean, such as Buryats, Kalmyks, Koreans, Chinese, Tuvans, etc. We believe that this is a very important trend as it leads to the realization in society of the real value of Buddhism as a common human heritage and not as the exotic Eastern cult. One of the main obstacles to the spread of Buddhism, not only in Ukraine but also in the Western environment in general, is, on the one hand, its demand for personal practice of the teachings. On the other hand, the unfamiliarity of Buddhism symbols and rituals, especially in tantric version, often creates certain obstacles for a Westerner to understand the essence of the Buddha's teaching. Modern Western science also shows interest in Buddhism. In many Western countries, there are research institutes for the study of Eastern religion and tradition, institutes of Oriental studies. Scientists defend the theses in various fields of Eastern tradition. There is a whole cohort and authoritative scientific specialists, Buddhists, who specialize in study of Buddhism in its historical, epistemological, religious, social, and other aspects. Scientific seminars, symposia, conferences are held at the local and international levels. The Theosophical Society in Ukraine maintains contacts with such scientists from the Academy of Science of Ukraine, invites them to cooperation. By the way, scientists believe that we can now talk about the so-called global Buddhism. And this is not only because his followers in the world now number about 500 million or half a billion people, but more because they live in different countries of the world on all continents. If you look at it in a historical context, interest in Buddhism in its philosophical and ethical aspects arose among the European and Ukrainian cultural and scientific intelligentsia only at the end of 19th century. In Ukraine, that happened mainly thanks to the activities of the Theosophical Society. Personally, Elena Petrovna Blavatsky and the daughter of her sister, Vera Zhelichovsky, that is HPB's niece, who was also called Vera Zhelichovsky. After marriage, her surname was Johnson. On this photo, you can see Lena Blavatsky with her sister Vera Zhelichovsky, and you also can see the daughter of Vera Zhelichovska, also Vera Zhelichovska, with her husband Edward Johnston, Charles Johnston. So it is Vera Zhelichovsky or Vera Johnston who first brought the sacred texts of the Eastern tradition to the then Russian Empire and translated some of them herself. At the same time, the first books about Buddhism in Ukraine were published, including a translation from the French work of Lucien Ferrer, Buddha and Buddhism, made by Ivan Franko and published in Lviv in 1905. An essay of Grigory Kovalenko, The Great Fate of Asia, Stories about Buddha, published in Cherkasy in 1918. A deeper acquaintance of Ukrainians with Buddhism was interrupted for almost a century during the Soviet period, when any interest in spiritual teachings that differed in any way from the communist ideology was persecuted. Thus, the first open systematic lectures on Buddhism, sermons and lessons of Buddhist teachings date back to 1989, when the power of ideological pressure of the Soviet system weakened significantly. At the same time, the first Buddhist initiation and teachings took place in Ukraine, as well as the first practitioners of the Buddhist appeared who accepted the Buddhist refuge of the three jewels, or three Ratna, in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The first communities were registered in 1991. During the 19th years of the 20th century, Buddhism was represented mainly by the traditions of the schools of Korean, Tibetan, and Japanese Buddhism. This activity was mainly carried out in 4 regions of eastern and southern Ukraine: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv, and Crimea. Such a territorial distribution was probably due to the least influence of traditional Christian culture and the mass consciousness as the inhabitants of these industrial regions. This is confirmed in particular by the fact that the largest number of communities and religious centers of non-Orthodox denominations were concentrated in this region. The first officially registered Buddhist community in Ukraine was organized in Donetsk in 1991. Today, there are about 100 Buddhist communities and groups in Ukraine, 38 of which have officially registered, and they have the status of legal entity. The most numerous communities and groups belong to the Tibetan branch of Buddhism, the Vajrayana Tantric tradition, or Diamond Chariot. Among them, the Karma Kagyu communities, the main branch of the Tibetan Kagyupa school, are the most widespread. They are united in the All Ukrainian Religious Center Ukrainian Association of Buddhists of Karma Kagyu School. In Ukraine, the spiritual practice of this center is focused executively on the laity. There are communities and groups of followers of this direction in almost all regional cities of Ukraine. The official printed organ of the Ukrainian Association of Buddhists of the Karma Kagyu School is the magazine Buddhism Today. The next largest number of communities and followers is also the Nyingma Tibetan School, the first Ukrainian community of which united in 1993 with the aim of the most effective spread of Buddhism in Ukraine into the all-Ukrainian spiritual administration, Buddhist Spiritual Order of Lung Jonpa, translated from the Tibetan as Guardians of the Commandments. The activities of this school are focused on both the worldly and the traditional monastic model of Buddhist spiritual practice, which is why a Buddhist monastery was built in the village of Olginka, Volnovakha district, Donetsk region. The communities of the Nyingma school were the first in Ukraine to start systematic preaching of Buddhism and receive official registration. Today, during the war, the Donetsk Buddhist monastery is in exile in western Ukraine, in the Carpathians, in the village of Krivopilya, Verkhovina districts. The official printed organ of the Buddhist spiritual order, Lung Chongpa, is the newspaper Lion's Roar. The first issue of the Buddhist Enlightenment magazine Dao was also published. This organization also has its website Nyingma in Ukraine, which today is one of the most detailed with Ukraine information based on Buddhism and is part of the international ring of Buddhist sites KarmaNet. The third largest number of followers and communities in Ukraine is the Dzogchen school, which as a separate school of Buddhism took shape in the west of the end of the 20th century through the efforts of Chogyan Namkhai Norbo, a Tibetan Lama in exile. Like Karma Kagyu, this school in Ukraine is aimed at lay Buddhists. These three schools are currently the main centers of the spread of Buddhism in Ukraine. In addition to them, there are also several communities and groups of other Buddhist traditions, such as Son School, a Korean offshoot of the Chan or Zen school. Then Nichiren Shu, a Japanese school represented in Ukraine by the spiritual order Nipponzan Mehoji. And the third, groups and communities that do not have a clear orientation to one or another Buddhist school and declare themselves as belonging to the Mahayana tradition or Great Chariot. Now I will show you some pictures. This is a visit of Lama Ole Needle in Kiev. You see a huge hall of visitors. This is Buddhist center in Kiev. This is a Buddhist stupa in the city Zaporizhia. This is a White Lotus temple in the city Cherkasy. This is the altar of the Buddhist shelter in the Buddhist monastery, which now are in exile and are in the Carpathian Mountains in the village of Krivopilya. This is the founder of this monastery. And this is the community of Dzogchen. So, in conclusion, I can say that Buddhism is in demand of the world today and has a positive dynamic of development and spread in the world. This is due to the interest and increasing demands of the majority of the world's people for the high culture of thinking and their desire to self-transformation and self-improvement. This is where Buddhism has an ability to help people. Let's wish him success in this noble cause. Dear brothers and sisters, I thank you for your attention and wish you all the best. I finished my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister SVITLANA. That indeed was truly enlightening. The presentation was engaging and empowering. Now, I would like to open the platform to all of you people, all of you viewers, and I would like to know what you have to say on the said topic.
I saw one question in the chat about the light of Asia. I can say that, of course, this book is translated, and we use this book every time during the White Lotus Day readings as a canonical text for White Lotus Day. Yes, we have this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister, once again.
Thank you, SVITLANA.
Hello? Hello, Mr. Shindi. Hello.
Nice to see you and listen you very carefully. You have chosen certain photos which are really inspiring to us. And this being the Vaishak full moon, how they celebrate Vaishak full moon in Ukraine?
Oh, you see, some we have only um, we have only how to say read the greetings to all members with this Vesak day. And we have no special ceremony, we have no special event on this case. We only said greetings to all members through our site, through our Facebook, and through personal conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything to say, any view to put forward? You are welcome. Thank you all. So what I understood from everything that Sister Svetlana put forward was that Lord Buddha has given to us a handbook to attaining peace, happiness, and harmony, to fulfilling what the humanity is truly meant for. In chapter 9, Shlok 18 of Buddha Charitam, Ashwaghosh quotes, "Na chaish dharmo vaniye eva siddhah, pure yapi siddhirniyata yatinam, buddhischa yatnascha nimittam atravanam, chalingam chahi bhiruchinham," which means attainment is not only achieved in forests, the salvation of ascetics can be accomplished in a city. Thought and efforts are the true means, whereas a mere forest or a badge of being an ascetic are the signs of a coward. So, with the blessings of Lord Buddha, may we all attain our higher selves. Maybe not in this life, maybe not in this form, in some other life with some other name or identity. But may the world once again lighten with love and find peace. On this note, I would like to thank all of you for your diligent participation. May truth be with us. Now, I would like for all of us to pray together. Astoma Sadgamaya, Tamsoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.